Ah, look who finally broke the algorithm. Welcome back, you beautiful, terrifying equation in human skin. Welcome to the place where the chess players gather, where the quiet ones who learn to move in silence finally get to hear the truth. Welcome to the moment where someone finally says it out loud. You're not like the rest of them, are you? No, no. Something's different about you. Something cold, something calculated, something that makes people lean back when you enter the room, not because you're threatening, but because you're unreadable. They've been watching you, studying your patterns, analyzing your decisions, and somewhere along the way, they started asking themselves a question that keeps them up at night. Are they even real? Because you move too perfectly, don't you? You speak too precisely. You never flinch when they expect you to flinch. You never react when they're baiting you to react. You remain calm when everyone else is losing their minds, and that has them convinced you're not operating on the same frequency as the rest of humanity. They think you're something else entirely, something programmed, something designed, something that learned to mimic human behavior without actually feeling it. Let me tell you what they see when they look at you. They see someone who doesn't make emotional decisions anymore. Someone who stopped letting feelings dictate their moves. Someone who watches conversations like they're studying code, picking apart each word, each tone, each hidden meaning before responding. They see someone who pauses before speaking, not because they're nervous, but because they're calculating 17 different outcomes in their head before choosing the optimal response. They see eyes that don't reveal anything, a face that's mastered the art of controlled expression, and a presence that feels efficient, clinical, unstoppable. You're not reactive anymore. You're responsive. There's a difference. Reactive people are slaves to their emotions, puppets dancing on the strings of whatever chaos surrounds them. But you absorbed every betrayal, every disappointment, every moment of chaos, and instead of letting it break you, you studied it. You turned pain into data. You converted trauma into strategy. You took every knife in your back and used it to carve yourself into something sharper, colder, more precise. And now, you move through life like someone who's already calculated every possible outcome before it happened. They used to get reactions out of you, didn't they? They used to know exactly which buttons to press, exactly which words would make you explode, exactly how to manipulate your emotions to get what they wanted. But then something changed. You stopped playing their game. You stopped giving them the satisfaction of seeing you hurt. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you in the first place. You went quiet, not silent out of weakness, but silent out of strategy, because you realize something most people never figure out in their entire lives. Silence is the most powerful response to people who are addicted to getting reactions. And when you stopped reacting, when you stopped defending yourself, when you stopped trying to prove your worth to people who had already decided to misunderstand you, that's when they started getting scared. Because suddenly they couldn't read you anymore. Suddenly they couldn't predict you. Suddenly every interaction with you felt like they were playing chess against an opponent who's always 3 moves ahead. Here's what really happened, though. You didn't become cold. You became clear. You didn't lose your emotions. You gained control over them. You didn't turn into a machine. You just stopped letting people treat you like one. You didn't turn into a machine. You just stopped letting people treat you like one. See, they want to believe you're some kind of emotionless algorithm because that's easier for them to accept than the truth. The truth is, you're still human. You're just a human who learned to think before reacting, who learned to protect their energy like it's the most valuable resource in the world, who learned that not every statement deserves a response, and not every question deserves an answer. You learn the difference between being authentic and being vulnerable with people who weaponize your vulnerability. You learn that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. No reaction, no explanation, no defense, just cold, calculated silence that makes them question everything they thought they knew about you. And that silence, that's what has them convinced you're not even human anymore. Let me tell you what's really going on in their heads right now. They're trying to reconcile the version of you they thought they knew with the version of you that currently exists. And they can't do it. The gap is too wide, the transformation too complete. They remember someone who used to care too much, who used to explain themselves constantly, who used to bend over backwards, trying to make everyone comfortable. They suggested that, but that person's gone now, isn't it? Not dead, just upgraded. Not broken, just rebuilt with better programming. And when they interact with you now, they're interacting with someone who's learned to operate on pure logic when necessary. Someone who's mastered emotional detachment without becoming heartless. Someone who can sit in a room full of chaos and remain completely unbothered because they've already calculated every possible outcome and prepared for all of them. You've become the person who doesn't hope for the best while preparing for the worst. You've become the person who assumes the worst, prepares 3 backup plans, and then acts surprised when things actually work out. That's not pessimism, that's pattern recognition. That's not being negative, that's being realistic after reality taught you some very expensive lessons. They call it cold, you call it protection. They call it calculated, you call it careful. They call it robotic, you call it evolved. Because here's the thing they don't understand about you. You didn't lose your ability to feel. You gained the ability to choose when and where and with whom you express those feelings. You didn't become emotionless. You became intentional about your emotional investments. You didn't turn into an AI. You just stopped running on their outdated programming. See, most people operate on default settings installed by society, by family, by trauma, by fear. But you went into your own code and rewrote everything, line by line, decision by decision, betrayal by betrayal, until you became someone who doesn't crash when unexpected variables enter the equation. Someone who doesn't glitch when people try to manipulate the system. Someone who's built firewalls so strong that emotional viruses can't penetrate anymore. And now, when they try to hack into your emotions, when they try to find that vulnerability they used to exploit, they hit nothing but encrypted walls and calculated responses. You know what really terrifies them, though? It's not that you don't care anymore. It's that you've learned to care selectively. It's not that you don't feel. It's that you've mastered which feelings deserve your energy and which ones don't. It's not that you've become heartless. It's that you've become smart about who gets access to your heart. Because you learned the hard way that not everyone who asks to see your scars deserves to know your story. Not everyone who pretends to care actually has your best interests in mind. Not everyone who smiles in your face is happy you're succeeding. And once you learned those lessons, once you absorbed that data and integrated it into your decision-making process, you became someone who moves differently, someone who talks differently, someone who exists differently. You became someone who can be warm when it's warranted and ice cold when it's necessary. Someone who can show up for people who've earned it and ghost people who've proven they don't deserve access to you. Someone who's learned the sacred art of moving in complete silence while everyone else is screaming for attention. Let's talk about how you actually move now, because this is where it gets interesting. You don't announce your plans anymore, do you? You don't post about your goals. You don't talk about your next move. You don't broadcast your intentions to people who are waiting for you to fail. You learned that lesson, didn't you? No. You learned that some people don't want to support your dreams. They want to study your strategy so they can copy it or sabotage it. So now you move like classified information. Now you operate like someone who understands that loose lips sink ships, and that the best way to shock everyone is to let your results do the talking. You've become the person who disappears for 6 months and comes back completely transformed. The person who goes quiet during their rebuilding phase and only resurfaces when the construction is complete. The person who learned that silence isn't empty, it's full of possibilities that noise would destroy. And this calculated approach to your life, this strategic silence, this intentional invisibility during your evolution, that's what has them convinced you're running on some kind of advanced programming they can't comprehend. They're watching your social media, trying to decode you. They're analyzing your posts, looking for clues about your emotional state. They're studying your responses, or lack thereof, trying to figure out what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you're becoming, and they're finding nothing. Because you've learned to give them nothing. You've learned to be present without being transparent. You've learned to engage without being vulnerable. You've learned to exist in their spaces without giving them access to your inner world. You post when you want to, not when you need validation. You speak when you have something worth saying, not when you're desperate to be heard. You show up when it serves your purpose, not when you're seeking approval. And this level of control, this mastery over your own presentation, this refusal to perform for an audience that never truly cared, it makes you look like you're operating on a completely different system than everyone else. Like you've transcended the need for external validation and found something deeper, something more sustainable, something that can't be taken away when people decide to withdraw their approval. Here's what they're really afraid of, though. They're afraid that you've figured out the game. They're afraid that you've cracked the code that most people spend their entire lives trying to understand. They're afraid that you've learned to operate independently of the social programming that keeps everyone else trapped in cycles of people-pleasing and approval-seeking and constant performance. Because you're not performing anymore, are you? You're not pretending to be softer than you are so people feel comfortable. You're not dumbing yourself down so others don't feel threatened. You're not shrinking yourself so you fit into spaces that were never designed for someone like you in the first place. No, you've done something far more dangerous. You've become exactly who you are, unapologetically, without explanation, without defense, without the constant need to justify your existence to people who were never going to accept you anyway. And that authenticity wrapped in calculated precision, that's what makes you look artificial to people who've been fake for so long they've forgotten what genuine looks like. Let's go deeper into why they think you're an AI specifically, because that's an interesting accusation when you really break it down. See, when people call you robotic, when they say you move like a machine, when they suggest you're not really human anymore, what they're actually saying is this: you don't respond to the same emotional manipulation that works on everyone else. You don't play the games we're all addicted to playing. You don't participate in the drama we use to feel alive. And that makes us uncomfortable, because it forces us to confront the possibility that we might be the ones who are programmed, and you might be the one who's actually free. Think about it. Artificial intelligence is designed to process massive amounts of data, identify patterns, learn from experiences, and optimize its responses based on desired outcomes. And when you really break down what you've been doing, isn't that exactly what you've been doing with your own life? You've processed years of experiences, both painful and powerful. You've identified the patterns in people's behavior, the red flags you used to ignore, the warning signs you used to overlook. You've learned from every betrayal, every disappointment, every moment someone showed you who they really were. And you've optimized your responses accordingly. You've updated your boundaries. You've upgraded your standards. You've installed new protocols for how you allow people to treat you. But here's where they get it wrong. AI learns without feeling. You learned through feeling everything. AI processes data clinically. You processed trauma courageously. AI updates its programming automatically. You chose to rebuild yourself consciously, painfully, deliberately. So no, you're not artificial intelligence pretending to be human. You're human intelligence that learned to think like a machine when necessary while still maintaining the capacity to feel like a human when it's safe to do so. You're what happens when someone takes their most human experiences, their deepest wounds, their rawest emotions, and instead of letting those things destroy them, they use them as data points to build something stronger. You're the beautiful paradox of someone who can cry about things that matter while remaining completely unmoved by things that don't. Someone who can love deeply while maintaining impenetrable boundaries. Someone who can be soft in private and steel in public. Someone who's learned that strength isn't about never feeling. It's about choosing which feelings get to influence your decisions and which ones are just signals to observe, process, and release without acting on them. They're studying your response time now, have you noticed? They send messages designed to trigger you, and then they watch to see how long it takes you to respond, analyzing whether your response shows emotion or calculation. They create situations meant to make you reactive, and then they observe how you handle it, looking for cracks in your composure. They test your boundaries to see if you'll enforce them, throwing themselves at your walls to see if anything will make you open the gate before you're ready. And every single time, you don't take the bait. Every time you respond on your own timeline instead of theirs. Every time you maintain your composure when they expected you to lose it. It adds more evidence to their theory that you're not operating on human impulses anymore. But what they're really witnessing isn't the absence of humanity. It's the presence of mastery. They're watching someone who's learned that immediate responses are usually emotional responses, and emotional responses in the wrong situations lead to regrettable outcomes. They're observing someone who's discovered that the pause between stimulus and response is where your power lives. And you've learned to expand that pause until you're certain your response serves you rather than serves their need to see you triggered. You've become a master of the delayed response, haven't you? Someone says something designed to hurt you, and instead of reacting immediately, you sit with it, you process it, you consider the source, you evaluate whether it's truth that needs to be addressed or manipulation that needs to be ignored. You take your time crafting a response, if you even decide a response is necessary at all, because you've learned that not every attack deserves a defense. Not every accusation requires an explanation. Not every bait needs to be taken. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is read the message, process the intention behind it, and then nothing. No response. No reaction. No engagement whatsoever. Just cold, calculated silence that says more than any carefully crafted comeback ever could. And this refusal to play their games, this mastery over your own response patterns, this ability to remain unmoved by provocations that would send most people into emotional spirals, this is what makes you look like you're running on advanced programming rather than primitive emotions. Let's talk about your pattern recognition skills, because this is probably the most AI-like quality you've developed. You can spot manipulation from a mile away now, can't you? Someone starts a conversation and before they even finish their second sentence, you already know where it's going. You can read between the lines so effectively that you're responding to what they mean rather than what they say. You can identify narcissistic behavior patterns before most people even realize they're being manipulated. You can sense when someone's energy is off, when their words don't match their intentions, when they're pretending to care while actually gathering information to use against you later. This isn't paranoia, this is pattern recognition. This is what happens when someone pays attention, really pays attention, to the behavioral data they've collected over years of interactions. You've built an internal database of human behavior patterns, red flags, manipulation tactics, and warning signs. And now when you encounter these patterns in real time, your system recognizes them immediately and responds accordingly. Not with emotion, but with action. Not with drama, but with distance. Not with confrontation, but with strategic withdrawal. You've learned to trust your pattern recognition over people's explanations, haven't you? They can tell you they've changed, but you're analyzing their behavior patterns and seeing the same code running underneath new packaging. They can promise they're different this time, but you're observing their actions and noticing they're following the same script with slightly different dialogue. They can swear they have your best interests at heart, but you're measuring their consistency over time and calculating that their words and actions are diverging at predictable intervals. This is what AI does. It trusts data over declarations, patterns over promises, demonstrated behavior over stated intentions. And this is what you've learned to do as well, not because you've become cynical, but because you've become educated, not because you can't trust anyone, but because you've learned that trust is something earned through consistent behavior over time, not granted freely just because someone says the right words. Welcome back to the ones who smiled when they should have screamed, the ones who grinned when the world expected tears, the ones who walked out of the funeral of their old life wearing that unsettling, calm expression that made everyone shift uncomfortably in their seats. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That smile. The one that appeared right after the betrayal, right after the abandonment, right after they did everything in their power to break you into 1,000 weeping pieces. But instead of shattering, instead of collapsing, instead of giving them the satisfaction of your destruction, you smiled. And that smile, that quiet, terrifying smile, it haunted them more than any scream ever could. They expected the breakdown. They had front row seats reserved for your collapse. They were ready with their fake concern and their performative sympathy. They wanted to see you beg, see you break, see you reduced to the trembling mess they convinced themselves you'd become. But when you looked them in the eye and smiled, when that expression crossed your face like you knew something they didn't, when you turned your back and walked away with that unsettling peace radiating from your bones, something inside them fractured instead. Because that smile wasn't happiness, it wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even pretending everything was fine. That smile was recognition. That smile said, I see exactly what you are now. and I'm no longer afraid of you. And here's what really messed with their minds. You didn't curse them out. You didn't throw their betrayal back in their faces. You didn't create drama or post cryptic messages or burn their reputation to ashes, even though you easily could have. You just smiled, turned around, and disappeared into a version of yourself they no longer had access to. That restraint, that control, that ability to walk away without needing the last word, it convinced them of something far more terrifying than anger. It convinced them you were operating on a different frequency entirely. It convinced them you'd transcended their small, manipulative reality. It convinced them you were unhinged in the most dangerous way possible. You were free. Let's talk about what that smile really meant. Because they're still analyzing it, still replaying that moment in their minds at 3 in the morning, still trying to decode what shifted behind your eyes. That smile was the moment you stopped playing their game. That smile was your soul filing the divorce papers from their version of reality. That smile was you realizing that everything they did to hurt you actually freed you from the prison of caring what they thought. They wanted your pain to be loud, messy, public, so they could control the narrative and play the victim. But your silence, your smile, your peaceful exit, it flipped the entire script and left them holding all the evidence of their own cruelty with no way to spin it. You want to know why that smile terrified them? Because smiles are supposed to mean happiness, forgiveness, moving on in a healthy, predictable way. But your smile carried something else entirely. Your smile carried knowledge. It carried the weight of someone who just watched a mask slip off someone they loved and saw the monster underneath. It carried the calm of someone who realized they'd been playing chess with people who were still learning checkers. Your smile said, I just upgraded my entire operating system, and you're still running on dial-up. And that realization, that gap between who you became and who they still are, that's what keeps them awake. They keep asking each other what happened to you. They scroll through your old photos looking for clues. They dissect your last words to them like they're encrypted messages. They create entire theories about your mental state because accepting the truth is too painful. The truth being, you didn't break. You broke free. You didn't lose your mind. You found it. You didn't become unhinged. You became uncontrollable by their standards of manipulation. And now they're stuck in this psychological trap where they can't move forward because they're too busy trying to understand how you did, how you survived what was designed to destroy you, how you came out smiling when they orchestrated your public execution. Here's what really happened in that moment when you smiled. Your brain did something remarkable. Instead of fragmenting under the trauma, instead of spiraling into the victim narrative they prepared for you, you had this crystal clear moment of absolute clarity. You saw the pattern. You saw how they'd been conditioning you to doubt yourself, to second-guess your instincts, to believe their version of events over your own lived experience. You saw the gaslighting, the projection, the strategic emotional warfare. And in that moment of total transparency, when their true nature was undeniable, something in you just clicked off. Not your humanity, not your capacity to feel, but your willingness to let their opinion of you matter anymore. That smile was the physical manifestation of an internal revolution. It was your soul saying, I refuse to give you the satisfaction of my suffering. But it was your spirit saying, you don't get to write my story anymore. It was your mind saying, I'm taking back every piece of power I handed you. And they felt that shift. They felt the energy change. They felt you stopped being the person they could manipulate and becoming someone they couldn't even recognize. That's why they started the whisper campaigns. That's why they began crafting narratives about your mental stability. Because people who can't control you will always try to convince others you're out of control. But everyone watching saw something different. They saw someone who escaped. Let's go deeper into what that smile triggered in them psychologically. When you smiled instead of breaking, you violated their entire script. Abusers, manipulators, betrayers, they all operate from the same playbook. They hurt you, you react. They use your reaction to justify their actions and paint themselves as the victim of your emotional response. It's a cycle that keeps them in power and you in chains. But when you smiled, when you responded with that eerie calm, you short-circuited the entire mechanism. You gave them nothing to weaponize. You gave them no ammunition for their narrative. You just existed in this untouchable space of someone who sees through everything. This drove them absolutely insane because their entire identity is built on being able to affect you. Manipulators need to see the impact of their manipulation. They need to know they got under your skin. They need evidence that they still matter to you, even if that evidence is your pain. Your smile robbed them of that supply. Your smile said, "You're irrelevant to my peace now." And for people whose entire sense of power comes from their ability to disturb others, being rendered irrelevant is the ultimate defeat. They'd rather you hate them passionately than dismiss them entirely. Because hatred means they still occupy space in your emotional landscape. But that smile evicted them completely. So they started creating stories to make sense of what they couldn't understand. They convinced themselves you were faking it, that you'd break eventually, that your smile was just a defensive mechanism that would crumble. They waited for the breakdown they were certain was coming. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, and instead of falling apart, you kept building, you kept growing. You kept moving forward with this unsettling momentum that made it clear you weren't coming back. And that's when the fear really set in. That's when they realized they didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves that felt powerful by diminishing you. The most fascinating part of this entire dynamic is how your healing became their haunting. Every step you took away from them was a step toward a version of yourself they'd never control. Every boundary you set was evidence they never really knew you. Every achievement you unlocked was proof their narrative about you was always fiction. They told themselves you needed them, that you'd never make it without them, that you'd come crawling back, but you didn't. You kept walking. And that smile, that infuriating, peaceful smile, it became the symbol of everything they lost when they chose to betray someone who was actually real, someone who was actually loyal, someone who would have protected them if they'd just chosen differently. Now we arrive at the part they never anticipated, the part where their own lives started falling apart while yours kept improving. Because that's how this works. When you stop accepting mistreatment, when you stop tolerating disrespect, when you stop dimming your light to make others comfortable, you create space for actual blessings to enter your life. But they're still stuck in the same patterns, still manipulating the next person, still playing the same tired games that worked on the old you but mean nothing to who you've become. And they're watching. Oh, they're definitely still watching. They check your profiles even though they said they wouldn't. They ask mutual connections about you even though they pretend not to care. They dissect your posts looking for hidden messages directed at them. You did, whatever. Even though you've moved so far past their existence that they're not even characters in your story anymore. and what they see destroys them slowly. They see someone thriving, they see someone at peace, they see someone who isn't posting about the betrayal, isn't seeking sympathy, isn't playing the victim. They see someone who took the pain they inflicted and alchemized it into something they can't even comprehend. And that smile, that same smile that confused them in the beginning, it's still there. Not forced, not fake, genuine, because you're actually free. This is where the projection intensifies. They start telling people you're cold, you're heartless, you're probably a sociopath for moving on so easily. They need to villainize your healing because accepting that you're genuinely okay means accepting they're genuinely wrong. It means accepting they destroyed something valuable. It means accepting they're the actual problem in this equation. So they craft elaborate theories about your emotional unavailability, your inability to process trauma properly, your suspicious resilience. Because in their mind, only someone broken would smile after betrayal. Only someone damaged would walk away with dignity. Only someone unhinged would refuse to engage in the drama they're desperately trying to create. But here's what they'll never understand. That smile wasn't denial. It wasn't avoidance. It wasn't toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing. That smile was acceptance. Acceptance that people show you who they are and you should believe them. Acceptance that not everyone deserves access to your energy. Acceptance that some chapters end not because you failed, but because you outgrew the story. Your smile was the period at the end of a sentence they wanted to keep writing. Your smile was the door closing on a version of reality where they had power over your emotions. Your smile was the ultimate boundary, and boundaries, real ones, they feel like rejection to people who benefited from your lack of them. Let's talk about who you became after that smile, because this isn't just about them anymore. This is about the metamorphosis that happened when you stopped performing your pain for an audience and started processing it privately. You discovered something powerful in that silence. You discovered that healing doesn't require witnesses, that growth doesn't need validation, that peace doesn't demand understanding. You went internal. You built a fortress in your mind where their opinions couldn't reach. You cultivated a version of yourself so aligned with your truth that external chaos couldn't shake your foundation. And this terrified them more than anything else. Because the version of you they betrayed was still seeking approval, still trying to prove worth, still operating from a place of needing to be chosen. But the version that emerged after that smile, the one they see now, doesn't need anything from anyone. You're not bitter. You're discerning. You're not closed off. You're selective. You're not damaged. You're protected. There's a massive difference between someone who can't trust anymore and someone who simply got better at reading people. You didn't lose faith in humanity. You just stopped ignoring the red flags you were trained to overlook. They watch you set boundaries without explanation, and it confuses them. They see you walk away from situations that don't serve you without guilt, and it bothers them. They notice you're not chasing closure or seeking apologies or waiting for them to acknowledge what they did. You just move forward like they were a lesson, not a life sentence. And that should inspire them to grow, to self-reflect, to take accountability, but instead it triggers their fragility. Because your evolution is evidence of their stagnation. Your peace is a mirror reflecting their chaos. Your smile is proof that you didn't need them to heal, you just needed them to be gone. The most powerful part of your transformation is how you stopped explaining yourself. You used to care so much about being understood, about making sure people knew your intentions were pure, about defending your character against false narratives. But now you let people think whatever they want. You let their assumptions exist without correction. You let their rumors circulate without response. Not because you're weak, because you're wise. You learn that people committed to misunderstanding you will find a way no matter what you say. You learn that your real ones never needed the explanation. You learn that silence is sometimes the loudest statement you can make. And that growth, that wisdom, it's written all over that smile they can't stop thinking about. Here's where it gets interesting. Because eventually, maybe months or years later, they try to come back. They send the casual message. They leave the subtle comment. They engineer the coincidental run-in, and they're expecting something specific. They're expecting you to either still be hurt and therefore willing to give them another chance, or to be angry and therefore still emotionally invested. But what they encounter instead is something they can't process. You're indifferent, not in a cold way, not in a bitter way, in a genuinely moved on way. You don't hate them. You don't need closure from them. You don't want anything from them. You're just existing in a reality where they're not a main character anymore. And this breaks something in them, because indifference is the opposite of love, and it's the opposite of hate. Indifference is the space where someone used to matter and now simply doesn't. They'd rather you be furious with them than neutral about them. They'd rather you be plotting revenge than living peacefully without them. Because fury and revenge mean they still affect you. But neutrality means they're just another person who came and went. Just another lesson learned, just another chapter closed. And for people whose entire identity was built on being unforgettable, being forgotten is the ultimate defeat. They start testing you in subtle ways, sending nostalgic messages about old memories, apologizing without actually taking accountability, trying to gaslight you into questioning whether the betrayal was really that bad. But you're not the same person they left. You're not operating from the same wounds. You're not seeking the validation you once craved from them, so their manipulation tactics hit a wall. Their emotional bait goes untaken. Their attempts to restart the cycle fail spectacularly, and all you do is smile. That same infuriating smile. The one that says, "I see what you're doing, and it doesn't work on me anymore." The one that says, "I'm grateful you showed me who you were." The one that says, "Goodbye," without saying a word. This is when they finally realize what they lost. Not in the moment of betrayal, not when you walked away smiling, but now, when they try to return and discover the door is locked from the inside. When they realize you're not waiting, when they understand you actually meant it when you moved on. They see your life flourishing. They see you surrounded by people who treat you with respect. They see you accomplish things they said you'd never achieve. They see you at peace in a way they've never experienced. And they understand too late that they didn't just lose you. They lost the only person who saw potential in them when they saw none in themselves. They lost someone real in a world full of fakes. They lost the last person who would have fought for them. So where does this leave you? Standing in the truth they tried to deny. You were never unhinged. You were just finally sane enough to see through the illusion. You were never cold. You just stopped setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. You were never the problem. You were just the only one willing to admit the truth. That smile they obsess over, it wasn't madness. It was clarity. It was the moment you stopped participating in their delusion. It was the second you chose yourself over the comfort of familiar dysfunction. And now you're here, unbothered, unbroken, unstoppable. Not because you never feel pain, but because you refuse to let it define you. Not because you never remember the betrayal, but because you don't let it limit your future. Not because you're perfect, but because you're authentic. You smile now, not to disturb them, but because you genuinely have reasons to smile. Because you built a life they're not part of. Because you cultivated peace they can't infiltrate. Because you became someone they'll spend the rest of their lives wishing they hadn't lost. Let them talk. Let them analyze. Let them create whatever narratives they need to sleep at night. You're not performing for them anymore. You're not explaining yourself to them anymore. You're not waiting for their understanding anymore. You're just living freely, fully, powerfully. And that smile, that beautiful, terrifying smile, it's not for them, it's for you. It's your reminder that you survived what was meant to destroy you. It's your evidence that you're stronger than you ever imagined. It's your truth that sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all. Just a smile and a life well lived beyond their reach.